Welcome back to Way of the Wrench, and on today's very special episode we are going to take this big, heavy, bulky PC and we are going to decase it so it's nice and slim and fits down into our cabinet a little bit easier, and we're going to make a nice little slide for it to come out so that we can work on it, replace it, repair parts in the future, no problems. So, let's go. So technically this PC does fit in here and it doesn't interfere with anything, including when the playfield goes up and down, which is good. However, I know there's people out there that are going to be scrambling for space inside their cabinet, especially if you did a standard size. So I figured I would do this for you guys. Now, the other thing is this one is big and bulky, right? There's at least half of this computer case that is just wasted space in there, and it's added weight because there's other things in there that I don't need, like CD drives and an old broken hard drive, etc. So let's get this decased and then we'll take a look at what we're doing. A couple things to note before we start tearing into this guy. A real obvious one is we cannot have electricity going to this when we're disconnecting it. So take off the power cord from the back, that we are safe that way. Now the next thing is there's lots of sensitive computer components in here that you can fry with static electricity. So things that you can do to prevent that is don't work over carpet, so that way your feet are kind of going like this, creating static electricity. And the other thing is if you keep a hand always on the metal case, metal table that you're working on, you will now be setting that static electricity and discharging it so that you won't fry any components. So let's start tearing into this. First thing up, let's get this side cover off. There are usually 2 screws from the back. Then it usually pulls to the back and then just comes off. All right, first thing to take off that's really easy is this SSD drive. There's 4 screws here and a couple plugs, and they are not interchangeable, so they'll be easy to figure out later. Next up is our power supply. We got 4 screws on the front of the cabinet, and then there's a large connector to the motherboard and a small one over here. Next up is the data cable from our CD drive, which you're not going to use in this cabinet build. Next up is the power button and the USB extensions and the little jacks for the mic and headphones, which will all be kind of useful for the build. So we need to get at this. Now, this is just a cosmetic cover that should just pop off. All right, next up is the GPU or the video card. So there should be 2 screws on the outside of the case and then a little clip and unplug. Now, if you've got a fancier video card, you may have some power to disconnect, but that's about it. Now there's 1, 2, 3, 4 connections to disconnect for the power button and the USB and all that from the motherboard, and I had to take the video card out before I got access to this one. Now there's 2 white and black skinny wires that are attached physically to the case. These are for your Wi-Fi antenna. So I think I'm just going to basically physically pry them off the case at the other end, and that way we can still have them inside the cabinet. If you need to, just very carefully pop those off of the actual Wi-Fi card. Last thing for this computer is the motherboard itself, and there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 screws that attach it to the bottom of the case. Now that we got that stripped out, this is a good 10, 15 pounds that is not going to be going into the cabinet, and look at this bulk, it is all gone. Pretty cool. So now let's take a look at our components and how we're going to arrange them on a board. Once you've got all your components out of the case, what you're going to do is on a scrap piece of wood or a scrap piece of paper, start laying it out so that you can kind of condense and compact the space without kind of making it too difficult to mount. And some things that you're going to want to keep in mind is where the outlet fans for the parts are and where that hot air is going to go. So in the power supply, it's going out the back, so this should be facing the back of the cabinet. Same thing with the video card here, it should be facing this way. Other than that, it's not a big deal. That air coming off the top is going to go straight up to the top of the back box, so that'll be good. Now, I would loosely plug things in so that you have things where they can go. Otherwise, you might have an issue where the cords are not long enough or they're going to not sit right. The other thing I would recommend is get all of the cords for your HDMI and your DVI and all those kind of connections to your monitors. Get those on there and figure out where they need to be and what space you need. So I want this fan to be pushing out the back, but if I push this further back, I'll be right up against the back of the cabinet and there's not going to be much room for these cords. So I've left enough room that they're not going to be too hard to get at. And what else do I got? I got my SSD drive over here and then my external kind of USBs and my audio jacks and things like that I can mount on the back here. Now this is my power cable. This is going to go up to the front and splice into the button underneath the cab for the soft start for the power. And then other than that, I think that looks good. So measuring from here to here and to the back, if I make a piece 15 inches squared, that'll be enough for this. And keep in mind, you could make that a lot bigger for the complete opening of the back of the cabinet if you want. I just figured there was nothing else that I really wanted to have mounted on the side, so there's no need to make it bigger. So I found a scrap piece of wood left over from making the cabinet, so that's always cool to be able to use up some scrap pieces. And on the sides, left and right, I'm going to attach these guys, these ball-bearing drawer slides. And this small piece here is going to go to the left and right on the side of the thing, and then the left and right need some way of kind of holding this inside the cabinet. So what I'm going to do is make some 2-inch by 2-inch kind of block, like brackets, and they're going to attach like that, and that'll allow that drawer to go in and out, and this will attach to the bottom of the cabinet once I got it all ready. So let's go make that. Now to take these drawer slides apart so we can attach this piece to the side of our shelf, all you do is you extend it out and there is a little black lever here. Pull the lever up and pull out. Now we're going to want to put this right in the center of our shelf, so make a nice pencil mark for exactly in the center. And then when you put these on the left and the right, make sure they are exactly the same, that way you don't have any weird binding going on. Sweet, this is ready to put in the cabinet. So now all you have to do is put the drawer in, make sure that it is centered, and make sure that it is away enough that we can close this access door without it hitting the front. So what I've done is I've got a 3/4 inch piece of scrap wood, plus a little 1/8 kind of spacer piece, just to make sure that I'm not gonna have any issues. Make sure it's flush, centered, and then use a couple screws to just push down in a couple spots, take it out, pre-drill the holes, screw the thing in, and then give it a test drive. Sweet. Now we just got to get all the components mounted to this so we can disconnect it from here and go do that. Nice. Now to mount these components to the board, there's a bunch of stuff. So the motherboard, I need some space off the board, so I've got these spacers that I'm going to mount them to, and there's a pack of 50 that come with little screws. So we'll screw the motherboard into the standoff and then screw the standoff to the board. Now, when I do that though, this video card is going to be loosey-goosey, so we need to support it. So I'm going to have to make a little kind of wood or a little sheet metal bracket to be able to screw in and hold that down. For the SSD drive, I have one of these little brackets that I can screw right here down to the board and then just mount the SSD drive to that, standing kind of straight up. And then the power supply has 4 screws here that mounts to the back of the case. I don't think there's needed to have all 4 in, so if I make a little bracket here, screw the bracket down to the board, and then use these 2 screws, that should hold that, especially if I kind of design the bracket to have these little kind of side pieces to stop it from moving that way. And then this here for the USB jacks and stuff like that, there's actually 2 screws back here that I should be able to just screw this down to the board, kind of facing to the front. So, let's get started. Moving on to figuring out our remote power switch, which we have to extend to the red momentary switch button underneath the cabinet. Now, there's a bunch of wires on here, and you can look this up online for what color wire is yours, but there's even an easier way, and all it requires is a $15 multimeter. So what you're going to do is you're going to set your multimeter to resistance, or if it's got the beep function, where you put the two leads together and it makes a little sound like this, which you should always test as well once you switch it over. So that beep tells me that this is connected. And if you don't have the beep function, when you look on here, that will go to a very low resistance, usually around 0. If it's got a little bit of resistance, it's just what's in the wires. So let's say I didn't know which wires were which. This is supposed to be a momentary switch for this button, meaning that it is off all the time until you depress the button, and then it should connect and allow electricity to go through, and as soon as you let go, it shuts off. So with that little bit of knowledge, we can basically just back probe on the connector here. With only 4 color wires and they're grouped in 2, it's really quite easy. Back probe the green and white, press the button, nothing happens. That's because that's the 3.3 volts for this little LED light here, so that you know when your computer is turned on. We're not going to use that. And then we've got this one here, which is the orange and gray, which I'm back probing right now. So when I push the button, there's power. You can see the voltage goes down, let it go, voltage goes off. So that means that we have to tap into the orange and gray on this one. I'm going to use this power switch from my button kit from Virtual Pin underneath the cabinet. And same thing, we got a bunch of connections here, and maybe you don't know what they are. Well, this is how you figure it out using the same techniques. So you just start by putting it on 2 terminals, push the button, nothing happened. That does nothing. Try another combo. Oh, there we go. There is our momentary on. So it's normally off until you push the button, and then it is on. So we're going to connect to these ones for our power switch. And if you weren't sure what the other ones were, this one's real easy. This setup is momentarily off, meaning that it is on all the time until you push the button and it shuts off, and then you let go, it turns back on. So it gives you kind of another function. And the only other 2 connections are these ones, which are for the bulb inside. And if you weren't sure about that, all you do is lefty-loosey, take it out, and you can literally see those gold color contacts go to the connections on your bulb. Now, the bulb in this case is a 161, which is, I believe, 14 volts, and they do sell some LED replacements to scale it down to 12 volt. You can run these on 12 volt, they're just not as bright as they could be. But the 3.3 volts that we were just talking about is not going to be enough for this. So if we want the light underneath the cab, then we just got to supply a 12 volt power source when the computer is on. Any kind of wires you were connected to that computer slide drawer, you're going to have this in the fully extended range when you go to figure out distances. Otherwise, when you go to pull it out, you're going to be yanking wires out. So another tip for the wiring anyway is go a little longer, that way you got options for cleaning it up after. So I'm going to attach it there. It's got to go over here. Something like that. There we go. And for power, I'm going to be sticking to red and black for the most part. I might mix it up whether it's 5 volt or 12 volt later, but for right now, for this power switch, it's just going to be red and black. Now for 12 volt power for that light, so that we know when the power is to the computer and ready to turn on, we're going to use one of these Molex connectors. So a little tip. Every time you get a power supply or computer parts, you always hang on to everything you have, and then one day when you need something, you'll have it. So for example, I bought a power supply and it came with a bunch of these different connectors. This is a Molex to whatever, it doesn't really matter. It's going to go on here, and I can snip off and connect those to the light for the switch. Now for the wiring, what it is yellow is 12 volt positive, the blacks are grounds, and the red is 5 volt. So I'll probably extend this with a yellow wire just to keep the 12 volts the same, and then just connect that and connect it to the switch. Now off camera, about every 6-7 inches, I put a little bit of electrical tape on all of the wires going to the power switch that is coming from the power supply from the computer. That way it just looks a little bit neater for now. Now, this is about the only thing I really want to run off that power supply. I don't want to start running the whole cabinet and start draining what the computer needs. So later on, I will put in a power supply for the 12 volt and 5 volt, and probably some power distribution blocks. That way it'll be a little bit neater and less wires to run. So let's put this in the cabinet. In order to test this computer, I figured I might as well put the power strip, that way we can power everything up and see how this looks. So this is our switched master slave power strip. So if I plug in the computer in here, anytime I turn on the computer, it'll turn on anything else that is plugged in on the green. So all the monitors and everything else we need to run. Now this is going to sit on this side, and there's 2 screws in the back, so we can kind of screw it into the cabinet and then pull down, and that should lock its position. And then, instead of just having a cord coming out here, I've got one of these guys, an IEC 320 switch. And that's going to sit in here like that. And that way, when we've got to turn it on, you just turn it on here, and there's a nice little 10 amp fuse in there. In case something's wrong, it'll blow. And then we got another cord that we can plug in from the outside. So it makes it a little cleaner, more professional. So I got to cut into this big expensive guy. I got to cut a couple inches off the cord here so that we can wire up this IEC 320. Now I did a really good video in the Raspberry Pi arcade cabinet, so I'll put a link to that above, but the wiring is really quite simple. So I'm going to do this and then I'll show it to you after. A little trick for installing these is put the screws in ahead of time, put it upside down so the screws don't fall out. Figure out where you want it on the cabinet, and then you just push against the cabinet to make these screws make little dents, and then you can take these screws out, put them in. Don't put them in all the way, just put them in snug enough that when you put this on and slide it down, it's got a little bit of resistance so it doesn't just fall out later. So let's put this in. And don't forget your fuse or this thing ain't gonna work. Time to hook up all the audio, video, and power cables to all 3 monitors and the computer. All right, here we go. The moment we have all been waiting for and is a long time coming. Let's see if this works. Oh, no poofs of big black magic smoke yet, so that's a good sign. Light's getting to here, so power should be getting to the computer. Next thing is the switchable power supply. It's off. Let's turn it on, and I'll probably switch up the angle so you guys can see from the front. All right, power strip is on, so now I'll hit the power button and see what happens. Whew, we got light on the cab. Computer's booting on, turning on. Come on. No magic. So now the troubleshooting begins. What is wrong? Why are these not turning on? So with these devices not switching on when the computer turned on, I was like, oh man, I've already botched the cable and modded it to fit into that ICE socket. So I was worried that I was not gonna be able to return it if it was broke. However, upon some digging, I figured out what it was. So there is a little like plus minus kind of knob here you can twist. All you got to do is make it a little bit more sensitive, it seems like, and as soon as I did that, it triggered it on. So all you do is you leave the PC on, make sure all the devices are plugged into the switch side, and just adjust it slowly till you hear all the TVs click on, and that's it. Second crack at it, let's turn the PC on. There we go, I can hear them all turning on. There's the D&D screen, there's the back glass, playfield, bam! Yes, all 3 screens looking absolutely beautiful, working like they should. And man, it was a lot of work and a long time to get to this point, so it's really quite nice to see it all working and looking absolutely amazing. Right, here we got Teardown. Absolutely amazing. Now there are some things that I have to still fix up, so when I turn on the computer, it just automatically kind of boots up right into Pinup Popper, so we don't have to grab a mouse and start opening things and things like that. But for the most part, we got this up and running. Yes, I have bent technology to my will and decased my computer and got my monitors going, and it looks absolutely beautiful. You know, it's kind of stressful hacking into expensive stuff and doing that kind of stuff to it, but it worked out okay and it was actually quite easy. So hopefully that info was good for you guys. Next video up is probably getting this thing to a functional budget pinball where we can actually push buttons and get flippers going and use a plunger, probably throw some audio in too. That'd be a really good way to end that video. If you haven't already, why don't you join us on Instagram so you can see all this cool stuff and all the stuff we're doing behind the scenes in between videos. Till next time, take it easy.